Well, good afternoon. This session is now started. Welcome to what is the last session today. It's the only thing between you and a cold drink on this lovely day. So I will bring discussions to a close no later than 6 o'clock. I'm David Jarvis, and I was the founder of UK PONI, which is now entering its second decade. I never in my wildest dreams thought that PONI could be so successful. And that success is due to all the directors and the staff, the amazing range of contributors, and of course to the sponsors. But I think my decision to pass on my role as director of PONI as it grew, and before I got way out of my depth, I think was pivotal to the success we see today. Anyway, moving on, I'm very pleased to be introducing Commodore Paul Dailey, who will give today's keynote address. Paul joined the Royal Navy some 34 years ago and qualified as a submarine weapons engineering officer. He's had a wide range of appointments throughout his career, and he's currently the Deputy Director for Submarine Capability in the Defence Nuclear Organisation, which is headed up by Vanessa Nichols, who gave us yesterday's keynote. Paul is going to tell us about the UK's nuclear submarine build programme, and then move on to how that sovereign capability might be leveraged to the benefit of the wider society and even the planet. And just a quick reminder that everything, including the questions and the answers, is on the record. So without further ado, Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. And it's a huge pleasure to be talking here at RUSI. David and I have known each other for many years. In fact, I think the slip of the tongue about Commander Paul Dailey was when I first met David, who was working back in, don't worry, working back in the MOD when I first came across David when I was Commander Paul Dailey. I think he was Captain Jarvis, working on the top floor in the main building. And that's indeed where I started to get invited through David to ponies. Although it's been about 5 years since I think I was last at a pony. It's the first time I've spoken at a pony. So it's a huge pleasure on both counts, and a huge privilege as well. So I hope to get some good conversation stimulated, and I can ask for the next slide to come up. So here's things I'm looking to talk about. I'll talk a little bit about myself so you know where I'm coming from. As David hinted, building nuclear submarines, that's kind of what DNO does. I work in a defence nuclear organisation called DNO. Also, to take that off into attack and thinking about the role of nuclear technology in society, but also bring it back at the end to thinking about the skills and careers that are available in the submarine part of this enterprise. Next slide, please. So I'll take my career in 3 stages. The first stage, circled by that green lozenge up the top there, the green ellipse. I started in the Royal Navy being sponsored at university doing applied physics. And then I joined the Royal Navy and started doing my training. So the first bit is around education and training. Becoming a naval officer, becoming a submariner. So for the naval officer bit, served on HMS Bristol on the top left there, then HMS Achilles, and then down to HMS Spartan, where I got my submarine qualification, known as a Part 3. It's where you get to wear the dolphins on your chest. Move on to the next slide, please. And the second phase of my career is around becoming a junior to mid-seniority officer, becoming a professional submariner, and also a professional engineer. So that's when I started to earn my keep, working as the Deputy Weapon Engineer Officer on board HMS HMS Sarah. Then coming back from doing that job to working in various shoreside appointments in operational support, research and technology, a lot of time up in the Clyde. That's the picture at the bottom right-hand corner there. And getting some more education on the way around doing an MSc in information systems and an MA in defence studies, and a bit of broadening. That's that photograph of a Toyota Land Cruiser with the UN symbol on the bonnet, driving there through the Western Sahara as a United Nations military observer. So first part of career is about that education and training. Second part is then starting to become professional engineer, professional submariner. And we'll move on to the third bit. The third phase was moving for me from engineering into project delivery. As a project manager and then a program director, twice in Abbey Wood, in the Trident Systems area and also in the infrastructure area. Also doing a submarine program liaison role in the United States. So that's that second picture on the right-hand side there. A bit more broadening, doing some course at Oxford University on project leadership. And also a bit of broadening. That's what that long photograph of people wearing uniforms is about in Pakistan, where I was was the UK representative for a year at a particular Pakistan Army organisation. And then coming back in to my current role here in MOD main building, where I now serve as the Deputy Director for Submarine Capability. So this third stage of my career was many years about becoming a project delivery professional. I want to emphasize that journey from education and training into engineering and into project delivery. And I'll come back to that at the end of the presentation. So on to the next bit then, please. So I know Vanessa, DG Nuke, at the beginning of PONI today, talked about the submarine build program. And that's what we do here in the Defence Nuclear Organisation in the Submarine Capability Directorate. That's where I work. You can see here some pictures of some of the products that we make. The Stu-class submarines, the Dreadnought submarines in build, and also the reactors, something we call core production capability. Next slide, please. I also know that this morning Vanessa highlighted that the DNO staff are engaged in scientific research, procurement of submarines, provision of specialised infrastructure, and nuclear disposal. So in addition to building submarines, we also run the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Programme, a space flight programme. So you can see that picture of a Trident missile being fired from a submarine there, which launched 3-stage rocket motors into deep space, way above the International Space Station. High-tech combat systems you can see on the right-hand side there, and also major infrastructure projects. I'm not talking about facilities management here. I'm talking about really big civil nuclear build programs. And also on the left-hand side there, you can see decommissioning disposal of our legacy nuclear submarines that have reached the end of their operational lives. That all comes into our portfolio here in submarine capability. Moving on to the next slide, please. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about why do we have submarines? So submarines support critical defence outputs, including the highest priority defence output, which is something we call continuous at-sea deterrence. The sole means through delivering deterrence, nuclear deterrence for the UK, is through what we call our SSBNs. I know we love to talk about military terminology here in the MOD. So SSBNs is those submarines that carry out our ballistic nuclear-tipped missiles. Currently, they are the Vanguard class submarines being replaced by the Dreadnought submarines. Furthermore, in delivering the 2021 Defence and Command paper, which you probably have heard about, if not indeed read as well, earlier on this year, the Secretary of State highlighted that the nuclear security environment has deteriorated since the publication of the 2015 SDSR. We do some really important work in this enterprise around protecting that deterrent capability. And submarines provide stealth, operating underwater, autonomy, mobility, punch, So by that, I mean things like the Tomahawk land attack missile from our SSNs, the other type of nuclear submarines that we have. These ones don't have the Trident missiles on board, and they have what is colloquially referred to as a hunter-killer role. So they're out there protecting our SSBNs and also providing a forward presence for anti-submarine warfare and anti-surface unit warfare, indicators and warnings, and a whole array of other things. Submarines with the nuclear power plants also provide flexibility and endurance and reach. That's something particular that you get above and beyond a conventional submarine with a nuclear propulsion plant. All the UK submarines are nuclear propelled submarines. So our nuclear technology underpins all these critical things that you can see on the slide here. And the truth is that the underwater battle space remains the last truly stealthy domain that our armed forces operate in. And I don't see that changing for a considerable number of years, certainly not in my lifetime. For that reason, adversaries are investing in submarine technology, not just us. But very few countries possess the skills and the capacity and capability to build and operate nuclear submarines. These programs are huge national endeavors. So a nuclear submarine has twice the component count of a space shuttle. It can remain submerged for months on end, carrying over 100 people, with all the hotel services required for that, making its own oxygen, running a nuclear reactor, as I highlighted before, carrying 3-stage space rockets on board that submarine that can launch underwater in difficult conditions. These are huge programs and projects. Next slide, please. So, which particular submarines are we currently building in the UK? Well, first off, the Astute class submarines. Our SSNs, as I highlighted before, with a hunter-killer role. So while this particular program faced several challenges, we already have 3 of these submarines in service: HMS Astute, HMS Artful, and HMS Ambush. And the 4th one, HMS Audacious, is not far behind. She sailed from Barrow back in April. You may have seen that in the newspapers. And that's her on the top right-hand here in the photograph. And if you can imagine that as against a backdrop of a national lockdown, which involved a huge effort from not just the shipyard up in Barrow, but a number of us. So I should clarify that was April last year. And she's almost finished her sea trials. Thereafter, Boat 5, HMS Anson, will be looking to launch early next year. And on the left with the scaffolding is that's HMS Anson in Barrow. And Boat 6 and Boat 7, HMS Agamemnon and Agincourt are already progressing well in the shipyard there. Next slide, please. In addition to the current class of Astute submarines, the UK is also undertaking 2 other programs to develop and deliver nuclear weapons. The Dreadnought class, and also something we're calling SSN-R, SSN replacement. And both of these complex programs deliver the most modern and capable submarines the UK has ever produced, and also secure the future of our continuous at-sea deterrence. A 50-year mission that underpins our national security. Next slide, please. So let's look at the Dreadnought program in a little bit more detail. So at 31 billion, the Dreadnought program is the UK's successor to the Vanguard class submarines. They will replace them over a number of years, and they must be replaced on time to maintain the continuous at-sea deterrence, 1 SSBN that we've had on patrol continuously now for over 50 years. But HMS Dreadnought is not simply a modified Vanguard class submarine. It's a whole new submarine design. There have been advances to address the change in the threat the submarines face at sea. New elements of design and new production strategies as well for building these submarines, as well as efforts to improve crew habitability on board the submarine. Some of these new aspects include a new nuclear plants, something we call PWR3. We have 12 missile tubes for the Trident missiles there, and something we're calling the common missile compartment. So there are elements of commonality in the design of that missile compartment with the US. Also, for the first time, we're looking at vertical weapon loading of our torpedoes. And that's our Spearfish torpedoes. And that's a technology that we've not used before on British submarines. Normally they would come in at an angle. Modular construction, a process honed through the Astute class build program, whereby rather than starting with the metal hoop and then building everything inside, building components that need to fit inside that metal hoop separately and then moving them in. Also, if we look at the photograph or the artist's impression down the bottom left-hand side, you'll look at the afterplane configuration there, the steering surfaces, the things that you use to go up, down, and left and right, or port and starboard, as we say in the Navy. That's no longer in a format like that, but it's a cruciform format, which is new for us as well. And there's also advances in the way we're using hydraulic systems on board the submarine. Moving to the next slide, please. So looking deeper into the future, we've already started on the design of our next generation of SSNs. As I said, that's called the SSNR, SSN replacement. As well as asking ourselves, what will the future underwater battle space look like in 30, 50, 70 years time? So we've got a technology development portfolio. We're looking at emerging science and technology innovations. And of course, I can't talk about all those things at this particular classification, but there's some of the ones I can hint at, I'll put here on the slide. So battery technology is really important. British submarines currently run with lead acid main batteries. We're looking at more modern battery technology, things like nickel, zinc, and lithium ion in the future. Looking at what we can do around electrification of systems. That's that kind of servo actuator down at the bottom right-hand side. And also something we call COMTET, the command team working in experimental test bed. We've got a facility where we're looking at the ways that people interact in a submarine control room and trying to optimize the layout and the way that people work. So when we look at this overall portfolio, we've got a huge scope of work here. Some of the most exciting challenges available for scientists, engineers, and project delivery professionals within our submarine programs. So I'll just leave that thought for this stage of the presentation. Move on to the next stage of the presentation. Next slide, please. So Vanessa, in her opening address, also talked about meeting our responsibilities for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. So let's look at the application of nuclear technology in defense and see where else it might be able to provide benefit. So if we currently look at how we apply nuclear technology in defense, yes, I've already talked about nuclear reactors for submarines, provide high energy density, give us a means of air independence, enables long endurance, long ranges, and that high power as well. But is it possible that nuclear reactor technology could also be applied elsewhere in defense? Smaller deployable nuclear reactors, potentially providing energy sources on the battlefield elsewhere. And also when we think about the government's commitments to net zero for carbon, and we look at where other capabilities outside submarines within defense use fossil fuels, is it possible that nuclear technology can provide alternatives? So defence has a central government target through the greening government commitments to reduce its emissions, and also to meet the aspiration in the Prime Minister's announced 10.0 plan to reduce public sector direct emission by 50% by 2032. If I could just pick up on that 10-point plan in the next slide. So point 3 on that 10-point plan is shown here on this slide. I'll just pause to have a little read of it. So it kind of highlights that nuclear power does provide a reliable source that is low carbon. And it also shows that the government is looking at what else we can do with this technology, particularly in small and advanced modular reactors. It also highlights that this isn't just a defence thing for us to think about. This is something that cuts across with civil. I'll move to the next slide now then, please. So where else could our nuclear technology work on submarines provide benefit to our society? Well, there's an obvious benefit of alignment and coherence between military and civil nuclear programs within the UK, both from a technological perspective and a skills perspective. And these benefits aren't new. Indeed, this symbiosis has existed since the inception of both programs in the UK. It takes years to develop the skills and the capacity to support effective and productive nuclear programs, be they civil or nuclear, and years to manage the liabilities, regardless of whether the program is a civilian or military program. So to make either of those programs effective and as affordable as possible, we should be looking to here, where we possibly can, at technology programs. We should also consider what the potential implications of the evolution of small modular reactors could be. So I'll put that as a question here, because I'm familiar from his leadership of the PONI that he likes to encourage us to think. And here's one question that I'm interested in the audience's views. Also, we should ask ourselves about the proliferation of military technology, what the implications are for the proliferation of military nuclear technology around the world, for the interactions between our military and nuclear programs. There's stuff to think about here that's really long-term and fundamental, that is really interesting and challenging when you get into the nuclear program. So turning to the next slide, please. So I tried to illustrate this graphically. That's how my mind kind of works. So if we looked at this kind of target board or onion description, whichever one works for you, at the center, we can see that we've got this naval nuclear propulsion program. It's a strategic capability within defense, but it might have future applications of defense outside submarines. That's the kind of next layer. Potential synergies in the future with the civil nuclear program, contributing towards net carbon zero. So that's the layer above that. And then we also might need to start thinking internationally about those international dimensions, the things that come back in from outside, and also the things that matter from inside the UK spreading outward. Next slide, please. So I'm coming towards the end here. So in trying to provide a journey through these sections, what I'm trying to say is that there's a huge scope of work here. Some of the most exciting challenges, as I said, for scientists, engineers, and project delivery professionals, not only within the submarine program, but potentially more widely. And from my journey in taking it over 30 years, as David highlighted, to go from education into engineering, submarines, nuclear, and the far end into project delivery professional, where that requires another set of skills. It takes a long time. And the challenges we deal with and the projects that we deal with have long time constants associated with them. So we need people that have perhaps seen some of the problems when we built the previous generation of submarine to think about when we're building the next generation of submarine. So if you're looking at nuclear as a career, we really need you. And I said that that I'd come back to that last point in a bit more detail. And I found it hugely professionally rewarding as a long-term challenging career. And I'll be really interested as well in kind of framing these presentations and getting you to think, is if that kind of prospect appeals to you and the audience there, and also what you can bring to the enterprise. So it's not just, it's back to that Kennedy thing, it's not just asking what we can do for you, but also what you can bring to getting us across all the grades and the seniorities within our program to think about. So that point, I'll pause, I'll hand back to David and see what we can do for Q&A.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much, Commodore Dailey, for a very clear and informative presentation. We've now got just over half an hour for questions. Please feel free, all of you, to ask whatever questions you have. Submit them via the Q&A box on the left, right-hand side of your screen, and I'll do my best to present them to Paul. But I do reserve the right to exercise some form of editorial function. For example, we've had a question asking how target changes are approved and sent to the submarine on patrol. It's a great question, and I'd love to talk about it, but I can't, and neither can Paul. So those are the sorts of questions that I won't pass on. I'm going to start by asking the first question just to get things rolling and see if we can understand how this works. Paul, the UK has a demonstrable capability, as you've shown, to design, build and operate nuclear submarines. The capability comprises, amongst other things, primary and supporting infrastructure, secure materials supply routes, political and financial will, and robust regulatory framework, and a sufficient number of suitably qualified and experienced people, which you picked up on towards the end of your talk. If there was one contributor to the overall UK capability that worried you going into the future, what would it be, and what should we be doing about it?
So thank you very much, Dave, for that question. I missed a little bit in the middle there. It was one of those problems with doing these things from Zoom. I had an open window here in the attic, and a car drove past, but I think I've got the gist of the question. And I think it's around, against all that scope and all the things that we need to do, what's the one thing that worries me most, if that's correct, if I've heard you?
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a reason for me framing these slides around starting with career and development and coming towards the end and coming back to that. Because yes, there are huge technology challenges, there's a huge funding challenge, there's a huge project management challenge, all those kinds of things. But with the right people, and enough of them, I'm sure we'll get through. But it's getting the right number of people and getting those skills into the program that worries me most. If we look at that forward program, there is an incline going up. There's a volume there. It's not steady state. We're building more submarines than we have done for many years. And also, I highlighted the command paper that Secretary of State presented earlier on this year, where he talked about worsening security environment. So it's never been more important what we do. So trying to attract, retain really good people in the program, and having that as a two-way contract. So it's not just about coming in, but also about what we can do to provide the courses, the experience, the career management, so that you're able to support, not just in the first couple of years, but 10 years later, 20 years later, in a rewarding and worthwhile career, which I think it is. But just seeing if we're engaging with the people that are out there that might be attracted. I'd allied to that as well, that there's a a diversity and inclusion element to that. So when we look around our programs, I think we see quite a lot of white, middle-aged people. And that denies us a huge talent pool. And yes, for some elements of the program, there is perhaps a little bit more work to do on thinking about the applications for vetting, but they're not hugely difficult to overcome. And I'd like to see us attracting representation from all those communities into the program, not just to get at the numbers, not just because it's the right thing to do, but having that diversity and inclusion also gives us different perspectives on our programs. I think one of the strengths of the Royal Navy, if we look back at the history of the Royal Navy, is that we've always been a multicultural organisation, and we've perhaps forgotten that in the past, and we've benefited hugely about that in the past. So really encouraging our diversity and inclusion agenda is where I'd like to emphasise. Over.
Well, I'm just going to segue on from that because you've led very nicely into sort of an extra question. Can you give us a quick update on where we are with women in submarines?
Yeah, so thank you. We have women serving on board submarines. It works very, very well. So in our time, David, I know we were male only organizations on board our submarines. So while I never, in my time, have personally been on submarines with women serving, it's not a problem. And I think that perspective also adds, really completely adds to the interactions we have on board the boat, both ways. I think it also has upped the game, dare I say it, in some of the male personnel on board, because we have some really, really good professional women submariners. And indeed, if I was to just to, without mentioning names, it's unfair to, but one of our women submariners who we've got working here in the Defence Nuclear Organisation, she's working on our Astute programme. She's served at sea on and done a compliment job already. She gave a knockout presentation that we gave to the Chief Naval Engineers Officers Conference that she gave to that conference last year. So a brilliant initiative. Wish we'd done it sooner. And if you're thinking about it as a career and want to engage, please via whatever secretariat function we've got here for PONI, be delighted to talk to you.
Great, thanks, Paul. I'm sorry to hog the limelight. I've got quite a few questions here, so I'm going to start with one, and I'll read it verbatim. How stealthy is stealthy when it comes to the underwater domain? Is the goal for UK SSBNs still to remain completely undetectable while on patrol? Or have advances and anticipated advances in detection technologies forced a greater emphasis on broader survivability, and perhaps stealth is a part of that? How might substantial strides in detection technologies be met by the UK and the submarine force in the second half of this century, say, particularly as we might still have some of the submarines that we're building today at sea?
So there's an awful lot in that question. So please prompt me if I forget elements of it, Dave. So I think the first bit was, how stealthy do our submarines need to be? And I can't obviously comment in absolute terms, but there are laws of physics here at work. And so when it comes to thinking about operating in the underwater battle space, there is a reason that we design our submarines to, well, you can go on a whole patrol for many weeks and months, if necessary, without needing to come up to periscope depth. So remaining submerged is a key part of our mission, because when we come to periscope depth and raise our periscope, we provide a visual signal as to where we are. And we also want to minimize that visual signal. So if we're operating underwater, what laws of physics are at play? Well, they tend to be around the acoustic domain. So remaining quiet is really, really important. So we invest a lot of effort into giving out as little noise as we possibly can. And we also invest a lot of effort into the technologies that we have on board those platforms to listen out for what else is going on in the ocean there. The second part of the question, I think, went on to thinking about stealth versus survivability. And I think asking if we were looking with advances in technology to compromise that stealthiness for ability. And I'd come back to the why do we have submarines here as the ultimate guarantee of the UK's defence. So, what are the components of that? I'm sure you've talked about this before. It's around credibility, capability, and communication. And that's not wanting to provide the opportunity for an adversary to miscalculate. So what do I mean by that? That we need to ensure that we're able to do a launch whenever required by a prime ministerial directive. And to do that, we need to remain as stealthy as required so that we're not picked up and compromised. And we also need to ensure that we have the required levels of survivability to be able to do that launch. So I won't say any more detail there because I'll start to get into difficult areas of security classification. There was one element at the end, the third element. I've forgotten what the question was asking.
I've just lost the question now, so it's gone. So, but I think the problem was if your submarine, or the question was, if your submarines are being built now with a life of 25 years, the chances are they'll probably be extended by 10, so that gives them 35 years. And then the last one might be 40 years, which is what we tend to experience a lot of. And technology improves, and it's a growing improvement. It happens in a smaller time scale each time, a bit like Moore's law. So, what are we doing, or are we confident that they will remain as undetectable as they need to be in 30, 40 years' time?
Okay, so thank you for that. So I think there are a couple of large components to that. And that's once you invest in something that's really expensive, like a submarine, because of the expensive because of the huge technical complexity, that you think about these things as once in a generation for certain parts of the boat. So it's really difficult during a 25, 30-year life to completely change the nuclear reactor. So when we come to a next generation of nuclear submarine, when we go to Astute class, when we go to the Dreadnought class, when we go to SSNR, we need to really think about that nuclear propulsion plant being not just for the next few years, but for the next several decades, and make a continuous investment in the capabilities we have in industrial base and also in the MOD to be able to provide not only capable nuclear reactor designs, but also we've got an obligation under our legislative control to provide good practice in those designs. Then when we think about fighting those submarines in whatever harm's way we put them in, there are opportunities, several opportunities during the life of the submarine to upgrade and change out the sensor suite, the combat systems that are associated with the submarine. And we do that on a regular basis. We have various maintenance opportunities. Some of them can be weeks long, but some of them could be years long, where we choose at particular points in the submarine life to put the submarine in and to do a bunch of maintenance, but also to think about the equipment upgrades that we can provide technology insertion to. And so to back all that up, I talked about the technology demonstration program and highlighted 3 elements that I could talk about here, but there's a huge amount behind that that's looking at low thresholds of technology maturity, seeing if we can work them up into things that we can take to see in trial, and then see if those things on the trial on the submarine can be thought of as a solution for capability goals later on in that submarine's life and be fitted to the class of submarine at those insertion points. Without giving too much away, I think I should also highlight in thinking about those opportunities, there's an awful lot around autonomy and autonomous vehicles that people have read about in the papers. And that's clearly something that thinking about it's referred to as the deep, the dirty and the dangerous roles where we can use autonomy to complement our capabilities in submarines. Over.
Questions just come in, which actually follows on from that. So I'm going to read it out to you, and then I want to move on to the future use of perhaps nuclear technology in the wider society. But this one I think ties in neatly with what you've just spoken about. And the question is, what are the new emerging threats to the SSBN sphere, which could undermine strategic stability or even increase nuclear risks? And the instances are the Russian Poseidon system, underwater drones, cyber attack to submarines, unmanned submarine attack. These are the sort of technologies that are coming along. And what's our strategy, or what's your strategy for addressing those threats? How do we go about doing something to make sure that we maintain our capability?
It's pretty tricky for me to answer in detail on the classification of this line, but let me just try and take a few of those things. And let's just talk a little bit about Russia, as you highlighted Russia from the question as perspective. And it's no secret, you can read about it, that the Russians have continued to invest in nuclear submarines and nuclear technology over the years. They've always viewed it as a priority, even when times are tough in their economic world. And times are tough at the moment with sanctions relating back to their movement into Crimea. So when we put those two things together, I think those relate, without going into more detail, to part of what Secretary of State was saying around a darkening security environment. So you would not be surprised if we were thinking about those things in our calculations. I would also highlight the things that don't perhaps make the first page on the newspapers, but if you do read the broadsheets and get to page 3 or 5 over past years, you'll see signs of Russian belligerence. So there are regular flights of Russian aircraft towards the UK mainland, turning away at the last moment as they reach UK airspace. And you can be able to read, you can Google it, of the response from the Royal Air Force, and indeed the response from NATO. There are operations like Operation Azidos, where we based a squadron of Royal Air Force Typhoons, I think they were, in the Baltic states to help respond to this Russian threat. So that's thinking about a particular country state. You'll have also read in the newspapers and seen in the output from the integrated review that the government recently conducted. And the language subtly changing in China to think about that relationship in terms of contest. So that also gets us to think about where we need to think long term because it is, as I highlighted, long term programs that we've got here. And then you also highlighted in the question about technology. I think it talked about drones. I can't remember what else it talked about.
There was unmanned submarines, well, particularly underwater drones, I guess, and cyber attack were the two issues that were raised in the question.
Okay. So there are some initially appealing articles that talk about how drones can potentially provide a particular threat to submarines. There are also some other articles that you'll be able to read about, which looks at the mass of this. So if you fly a drone, how many drones do you need to cover a particular area of the ocean? How long do they need to remain on station for? How long do their batteries last? And also the communications behind this, and running this as a command and control enterprise. And that's where you start to look at the scale of that particular challenge and how big the oceans are, and start to question how realistic some of these proposals are. When it comes to autonomy, then the autonomous vehicles that are the underwater autonomous vehicles that are around the world, you can read about those as well. They have a certain endurance that's dictated on battery life. So again, there's a certain level of realism about the threat they can provide to submarines, but not necessarily about the way that they could potentially be operated to do jobs that might currently be thought of being provided by other forces. And I'm not just talking about SSKs here, the diesel-powered submarines. So those are things that other countries are looking at. Those are things that our country's looking at. Last bit about cyber threat. Yes, hasn't cyber changed the landscape? And that was also highlighted amongst the other priorities the government had seen in the integrated review. I won't go into any more detail on this line about that.
I would just add that one of the things that I would find interesting to have a real hard think about is at the moment it will be dismissed, but we can't be that far away from nuclear powered submarines, unmanned with AI within the next 50 years or less. Maybe Tesla's in that business, who knows? But that would be a force multiplier and a real game changer. Stops all that limitation of the human limits on board the submarine. But I want to move on now quickly to talk about a little bit about moving into the less military domain, into the more society, big planet domain. And there are a couple of questions on that. One very short question. You're talking about nuclear technology being transferred into society and giving benefits to that. And one of the questions here is there anything in that about medical applications?
Oh, he's back.
Oh, sorry, did you go? Or did I go?
You throw, I don't know if it's me or...
Okay, so wonders of modern cyber technology. The question really was, you talked about transferring the nuclear expertise and technology into the civilian arena effectively. And the question is there anything that you're aware of that the military is helping in medical issues with looking after materials and sensors and things like that, rather than just for power? Is your portfolio broader than just looking at energy?
So my personal portfolio isn't, but I'm just trying to work out exactly what's meant by, is there anything in medical from nuclear technology? Are we talking about medical treatments? Are we talking about kind of field hospitals? What?
No, I think the question was actually asking the fact that there's a lot of nuclear some nuclear aspects in the medical field to do with diagnosis equipment and radiotherapy and all that sort of stuff. And it involves handling exotic materials, and the military nuclear enterprise does that all the time. So
Okay.
Is there a read across from that?
Okay, well, I think that's a great question then, because I asked for the audience to give us things to think about, and personally, I'm not aware of anything that's going on in that dimension. But if the person that's asked the question thinks there's something that to leverage there, that possibly they work in that domain already, then please let us know, because or it might be there is stuff going on and it's just not in my area, that I just don't know about it. But that's the benefit of doing PONI, is it, and getting us to think about these things.
Well, here's another one. The plan, this sort of helping pushing the technology into the wider space. Does the plan include the development or use of fast breeder technology to regenerate fuels or reduce waste, both from the military and indeed from the civilian reactor world?
So I'd love to be able to give an answer to that, but it's just not my area of expertise. So I'm trying to highlight things to ask about, and I am the same trade as David was and is as a weapon engineer, although I have done some jobs that have touched a little bit more than a normal weapon engineer would do in nuclear reactor technology, but I just don't have the expertise, unfortunately, at this call to answer that question. I'm really sorry about that. But again, if there's someone in there that you can pass that on, so that I can feed it to the right people in my organisation that know about these things, then I'll be happy to do so.
Well, I think that's the important bit. So the question's there. So can we feed it back in to your organisation and just ask the question? And it may well be if somebody went, and why didn't we do that? Why didn't we think about that? And so it will have been really important. So here's a good one. The case for small modular reactors will come up against many objections before they're actually in place and deployed. And the objections will be about location, the NIMBYism, safety, all that sort of stuff. Has any thought been given to leveraging submarine experience and placing them on the seabed near an offshore wind farm, out of sight, out of reach, and with easy access to existing transmission infrastructures?
So two parts to that question. Great question, by the way, thanks. The first bit around the kind of NIMBYism and public perception, should I say, and the second one specifically around a particular question on have we done something, and just to quickly answer the second bit, no, we've not, as far as I'm aware anyway, put a small nuclear reactor on the seabed and done what the questioner proposed. But I think the first bit is really, really important. So we almost seem to be, within the UK, apologetic about having a nuclear program. And while, yes, we would wish for the world not to need to have nuclear weapons, and not to need for the UK to have a nuclear deterrent, the fact of the matter is that we are living in difficult times, and there is a need for nuclear deterrence, and that the government's policy is to pursue that with a nuclear deterrent. And it's similar to our approach to nuclear reactor technology, not just for our nuclear submarines, but also for the civil program. And that's kind of in contrast to many other countries and their public public engagement around nuclear. I remember on a particular visit to France, engaging with the head of their submarine service and their equivalent of their Secretary of State for Defense, who said the French view of nuclear weapons and nuclear technology was that nuclear makes France free. And I mentioned that I had served in Pakistan. And in Pakistan, huge public support for their nuclear program there. So we are thinking about that in the Defence Nuclear Organisation. We're thinking about how we inform, not just from the MOD's perspective, but across government, how we inform the public so that they do understand why we have a nuclear program. They do understand the goodness of that nuclear program, and to perhaps get a slightly different debate going where we don't appear apologetic about having these programs, but we understand how important they are for all the things that we take for granted: our security, our prosperity, our ability to switch on a light and to have power coming out there.
Yeah. Again, another thank you. That I think I couldn't agree with you more. We do find ourselves apologising a lot for it. That led, one of the things you said about being in Pakistan leads to one of these other questions. Just finally, I think, and somebody noted it was interesting to see that you had your time at the Staff College in Pakistan. And did you have any comment on the nuclear scenario in South Asia? And you mentioned the fact that Pakistan was very supportive of the nuclear program. Do you want to say any more about the wider South Asia view of nuclear?
Yeah, I'll be delighted to, David. So indeed, in my time there, I did a nuclear first, if you like, and that I led I offered to the three-star general who headed up the organisation I was working in, the three-star Pakistani general, to host a nuclear symposium. Call it Pakistani version of PONI, but much reduced. Taking your lead, David. So we had the equivalent of DG Nuke turn up. We had a ex-Secretary of State for Defence. We had an academic from Pakistani nuclear arena there. And I led with my Pakistani colleagues a presentation talking about various aspects of nuclear policy, which also included a personal critique. I mean that in the nicest possible way of what I could discern from looking at Pakistani public announced policy on nuclear deterrence, and also applied that in the South Asian context. I, without wishing to go into a huge debrief of that, because I'm not sure we've got time to do it on this particular call. What I would say is that within the UK, I think we have a very mature dialogue over a number of years about why we have our nuclear deterrent. It's been well thought through for a number of years. We also have that point, though, from the previous questionnaire about thinking about how we inform the public. And the one quote that I would give you from one of the Pakistani individuals when I talked to them about their approach to deterrence is using something called the Suzuki Moran. So if you were to drive around Pakistan, the most popular car you would see is the Suzuki Moran. It's everywhere. It's tiny. Think about it in kind of the original Mini size. And there are regular competitions on a daily basis on how many people you can fit into a Suzuki Moran, because you'd see it driving around on the road. And they're in various states of repair, going from the brand new to the, oh crikey, how many bits have fallen off? And one of the speakers from the Pakistani side said, think about nuclear deterrence as two Suzuki Morans driving toward each other as fast as they can. And who is going to flinch first? And he said that the Pakistani approach to driving the Pakistani Suzuki Moran would be to blacken out the windscreen, to drive rather erratically to give the impression to the other driver that they were drunk, and to throw out a bottle of whiskey just to reinforce the point, and to ensure that it was most battered up Suzuki Moran they could find. So you question whether it actually would get there or whether the brakes would fail at the last moment. And I'm not sure that that's the kind of approach that we would recognise to our UK nuclear deterrent, and it gave rise to lots of fruitful conversation.
Very interesting. It would be a great debating point sitting in the policy shop in the Ministry of Defence as to whether that was a good analogy or not. Thanks, Paul. I did promise that we'd be finished by 1800. It's 1 minute past. Thank you for closing the day so well. I'm sorry to those people whose questions I've not had time to put to Paul. Thank you to the PONI team and the RUSI team, and thank you to all of you who've participated. Tomorrow, the conference will resume at about 1300, well, at exactly 1300 for the final day of events. And this day includes an interactive futures exercise in collaboration with N Square and the School of International Futures, and I commend it to you. So here we are, 1 minute past 6. You can now go and have that nice cold drink. And Paul, thank you again.
My pleasure, David, and really great to see you, and also, if not to see the crowd, imagine they're out there. I look forward to being involved in ponies in the future, if it's possible, in whatever.
I'm sure it will be, and I hope it is. And it's quite interesting, isn't it, this talking and you can't see anybody. It's quite weird. I'm not sure whether it's the future. Anyway, thanks ever so much.